Okay, talking about affordable student housing cooperatives. I'm Kritters, and I'm the Zami representative to North American Students of Cooperation, NASCO. This can be a mouthful because what is Zami? What is NASCO? Zami is a part of the Santa Cruz student housing cooperatives, and there's one, and it's down on Laurel Street between Blackburn and Felix. There's currently like 11 members who live there, and I used to live there for a year last year, and it was a really great experience. And now I represent them to the nonprofit that owns them, NASCO. Clicker. So I was curious about who here lives in an intentional community, co-op, shared housing, alternative living space, co-housing. So I see, oh whoa, a lot of hands. And of those people raising their hands, you can keep them up or put them down. Oh yeah, keep them up. Do you know that each other live in these co-ops? No? That's a project that we're kind of working on, and this is a great opportunity to figure out how to get involved and how to communicate with each other and share resources. So here's the academic definition of what a cooperative is. But more simply put, like a cooperative is just this really cool intentional space where a bunch of folks live and have a couple, like maybe policies in place, share food. Like cooperatives are like different across the board. And this is just a nice little academic definition. Okay, so NASCO, North American Students of Cooperation. They own 13 properties across the country, and they're this nonprofit station in I guess Chicago. We have a lot of meetings there. And it's a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to strengthen and expand the cooperative movement in Canada and the USA. And they do a lot of like education. They have a bunch of resources on their website, which I'll mention later on. And they are really looking to forge alliances between cooperatives. So by them like owning cooperatives, it's not this like scary landlord head figure, like, hey, you need to do these things, pay your lease on time. It's more of them being like, hey, like, how can we connect you to other communities, and how, like, what resources do you need, and how can we help? And it's interesting because their co-ops are located in like Chicago, Michigan, Texas, and one in Santa Cruz. And yeah, it's really cool. We get, since I'm on the board and the representative from Zami, we get together and we talk about like things that arise and problems, and like how either through financially or their resources to education to support each other co-op. And through their co-ops, we have this, see you Liz, we have this really cool way of like budgeting and helping each other. So all the co-ops are connected, and all like different loans or different ways of like exchanging money are through like shared with each other. So if one cooperative can't make a lease or like can't make a certain payments, there's like reserves, and there's reserves for maintenance, there's reserves for education, there's reserves for if you can't pay your lease. NASCO is really awesome. So a little bit of history. As for modern cooperative enterprise, because we know that this whole idea of like cooperatives and community living together and then living with certain intention like has like goes way beyond 1844. But as for the modern cooperative enterprise, it was in Richdale, England, and it was in 1844, and it was a group of weavers. And they were really tired of the factory owners controlling production and jobs, and shop owners controlling consumer goods. So they got together and like, cool, we're gonna change things, and we're gonna come up with some principles that we all agree on. And those principles are on the next slide. But it's really cool because from that, those principles are now instated in cooperatives and the ideals of like how a cooperative like should run. And the first student cooperative was in Harvard in it was in the 1820s. It was during that time period. I actually don't know the correct year. And then we can go on the Depression and the Berkeley student co-ops. And this goes into affordable student housing. Like the Berkeley student co-ops are really awesome, and it's an opportunity for students to have an option that's more affordable than living in the dorms or like trying to find housing with a landlord off campus that might not be the coolest landlord and is actually going to take advantage of you. And so on and so forth. And then NASCO came along, and we're like still expanding. And so we have a bunch of co-ops that are around the country, but there's this whole notion of like, how are they connecting each other? Yeah, there's NASCO, but they only own 13 co-ops. Like, there are thousands of student co-ops and regular co-ops. I'm talking about housing co-ops. There are even way more housing, like co-ops other than housing there throughout the country. And the project that we're really focusing on has to do with like, how are we connecting these co-ops? But first we're gonna dive in to the principles that came out of the Weaver group. In the first principle of the cooperative, I'm using all of my saliva. The first principle to come out was voluntary and open membership. I need more. I almost want to drink that water from the flowers. Ooh, there's water down here. I hope this is fine. Okay, cool. And the second principle, democratic member control. And so with that, like each member of the cooperative like has a vote and has a voice, just like people. And it's really nice to live in a cooperative and like feel like what you're actually wanting to do and actually want to happen like has an effect on like where you're living. And so with the third principle, the member economic participation, so that's a matter of like, you know, not only participating financially, but also participating in like the cleanliness of the house and taking in jobs and chores. And the fourth principle I feel like sums up the first, second, and third is the autonomy and independence. And feeling like you're a part of this community and you have like some quote unquote ownership. I don't really like ownership and privatization. Sorry, that's a whole nother topic. The fifth principle is education, training, and information. So like with what I was saying, like a part of the co-op, like some of the funds, like for instance with Zami, since I work so closely with them, they have this house fee, and the house fees, a part of it goes to reserves, a part of it goes to maintenance, a part of it goes to utilities, and a part of it goes to food. And so a part of this education and training, you can use some of the money from your reserves to like bring in workshops, or like if you want to have a fun day and you also know someone that's even a part of your own community and want to educate, then you can use some of that money to like buy the food for that event. And this is what is really interesting, the sixth and seventh principle, the cooperation among cooperatives. And yeah, I see that there is a lot of like lack in that cooperation between cooperatives and concern for the community. Because when you get in these cooperatives, like sometimes it's just really cool to have a community within yourself and the group of people, because you have this intention and you have like a process for that. And this is where we're going to talk about economic organization. And so, like I was saying, like there's not just housing cooperatives. There's cooperatives are actually a general form of economic organization that manifests in every form imaginable. In more than 100 countries, co-ops have grown to become top players in certain industries. So we can see housing, food, dining, bookstores, childcare, credit unions, agriculture workers, and so on and so forth. There's so many different types of cooperatives. And as for the student cooperatives today, so there's only a small percentage of college campuses that serve like the amount of student body, and like even less that actually get to accommodate those students. And the top three concerns that we're talking about when we talk about the student cooperatives movement is like, are cooperatives relevant to today's students? Can anybody answer that? Like, do you feel like cooperatives are relevant to today's students? And maybe why? Mm-hmm. Completely. Yeah, it's pretty relevant. And not just to students, like you were saying. And I think Lyra did a good job of eloquently presenting that, and that was really nice. Yeah, so cooperatives are pretty relevant because they make education more economically feasible. I'm about to graduate, after this quarter. Pretty excited, but I'm also not excited about my $40,000 loan that's following me. And so it would be interesting, and what I thought with this project that we're working on is like how, if I'm a student that deals with it, like imagine how many other students deal with this huge cost of going to university. Sorry, I'm just sadness. Is a co-op on every campus financially realistic? So obtaining financial, so there was like some ways of like navigating this, and other co-ops. So some ways that they're talking about is like other co-ops. And so with NASCO, for instance, like other co-ops, there's a bunch of students who live in the Zami Cooperative, and not all of them can make lease. Literally, I mean, this is another story, but there hasn't been full lease payment for a whole year at the Zami Co-op. And NASCO is able to balance the reserves between the other co-ops to help the Zami Cooperative out because of like they're really hardcore, like not a budget plan, which is really hard to read and understand, but it's things like that, and like having other owners and like creating relationships and understanding like how can we like help run the cooperatives, or like what are ways to like save water, like what are ways to integrate permaculture design, which is really fun, and so how can we realize our vision? And this is what I really enjoy and love, is like us and you and getting connected and seeing the amount of people that are in this room that actually are connected to cooperatives or intentional living spaces, and like how can we create that conversation? Like how can Zami like lean on other people in the community and in order to like have a future and to be a successful co-op, and how can we create more cooperatives and educate more people on like how to start cooperatives, because cooperatives don't necessarily mean like owning your own house. I mean, you can go through a landlord and like set your own guidelines, be like, hey, like we're a co-op and we want to have this sort of thing going on, and we have the intentions of this, and so the future. From this project, which is called the Santa Cruz Intentional Living Collective, we're hoping to maybe gather a bunch of folks who are in intentional living spaces, who are interested in it, to present this to colleges. I mean, Santa Cruz isn't connected to the cooperatives movement, and presenting that to Affordable Housing Office and as an option, and creating more cooperatives. And I have a bunch of resources through NASCO, and so it's really nice to share that information and more communication and the sharing resources. So this is, thanks. This is the Santa Cruz Intentional Living Collective. There's Tumblr, Facebook, email, and I know this is all electronic, and there's a Google group, but eventually it would be nice to have this in more of a format of like a newsletter or a flyer. And if you want to know more about the project or get involved, or are you a part of a community, we would love to collaborate and just share resources. And there's a flyer over on the table. And this is what Zami looks like if you haven't seen it. This is the back house, the mission statement. Food Not Bombs cooks all their food in our kitchens. We have a bunch of shows there, and their intention is to have like a queer, feminist, radical space. And it's really cool because this was one of many thousands of co-ops. And thank you. It was really awesome. There's more resources. Sign up on the sheet if you want to get involved or want to know more. Thanks.